In this lesson, we'll explore shared hosting, managed WordPress hosting, and self-managed WordPress hosting. You'll follow along as I diagram what each one is and in what situations it makes sense to use them. By the end of this video, you'll understand when shared hosting is appropriate, how managed hosting works for multiple sites in a done-for-you system, and how self-managed hosting is the most economical for multiple sites. Let's talk about WordPress website hosting. Now, as far as the Leverage WP framework, here's where we are. This is the entire framework, and we've been talking about design as regards the website itself. But now we're going to focus on hosting a WordPress website. What it takes to do that, what are the different parts that come into play, and how do you judge what WordPress website hosts are best for you? There's a lot of false information out there with reviews and affiliate links, and so it's easy to get confused regarding what WordPress website hosting is best and best for your situation. And so as I zoom in here on the iPad and look at the system that we're talking about, again, right here under website hosting, which might include, landing pages, an e-commerce shopping cart, opt-in forms on the website, we're going to be focusing on the hosting portion, which as you look at the framework here, it has a red check mark, which means it has a cost to it, And then in blue, because I've marked this in blue, it needs hosting. It needs somewhere where the WordPress site can live and the data can live, just like other places like email, which we'll talk about later, and hosting a contact list and automation needs hosting, etc. The website is the thing we most think of when we talk about hosting. So as we scroll down here on the iPad a little bit, as far as WordPress hosting, I've got a little left-hand side key over here where I communicate kind of the level of cost and whether a hosted solution is necessary here on the Leverage WP framework. But if we look at hosting, there's, as an overview, 3 types of hosting. I've categorized 3 categories and types of WordPress hosting, some of which are appropriate for some situations and others that are not. And so each of these kind of has their place: shared hosting, managed hosting, and self-managed hosting. And so we're going to be talking about these 3 different levels in some different lessons coming up. But this is the overview about what each of these are and where and when you might want to use this type of hosting in your business or for your WordPress websites. So starting with shared hosting, these are all relative to WordPress websites. Now, shared hosting, if you look at this section up here at the top right, shared hosting means that there's a server, a box, where the website files and the database have to be hosted, connected with a very fast connection to the internet. And each of these boxes represents a single website. Each website needs its own database and needs its own set of files and website storage. So each of these little boxes here represent not only a website, but often shared hosting includes the domain registration. It includes email addresses and email hosting of emails themselves, and controlling the domain name and the way that it points to the website hosting, and controls the traffic that goes from either the website or the email. The DNS stands for Domain Name System, and again, we'll go into detail later in the course. I have a whole section dedicated to domains and the DNS system. And so the concept here is that with shared website hosting, first of all, it's the lowest cost for good reason. The shared hosts are able to load up one server with multiple websites, virtually separating them. However, even though they're virtually separated, meaning the managers or the website owners don't have access to each other's websites, the resources that each of these sites are using is shared, and that's the big definition of shared website hosting. One of the things about shared hosting is that oftentimes it's the easiest to get started with, because when you're looking at going and putting up a website, the shared website companies make it easy. They'll register the domain for you. They'll include email hosting. They'll host the website, and they'll just take care of pointing the website correctly, all in the background without you having to deal with it. And so they're able, by loading up a server with multiple websites like this, they're able to serve websites at the lowest cost level. And I would recommend shared hosting for someone that's just starting out, or if you're just hosting 1 to 2 to 3 websites for yourself. As far as selling websites, hosting, and website care to clients, I wouldn't recommend starting with shared hosting. There are better ways to go, although the costs go up just a little bit for each of these kinds of hosting. And so let's define the other two types of hosting. Let's go to managed hosting. Now, you've already plugged into a company called Flywheel and gotten your free 60 days of hosting with Flywheel hosting, and that is a managed WordPress host. Now, what managed WordPress hosting does is it kind of takes care of the do-it-yourself problem, where there's a lot of complex parts needing to be connected properly, and they take care of that. That's the managed part of it. And what they do is they still manage the servers for you, although instead of sharing resources between customers and filling up the servers with many, hundreds or thousands of websites, the managed WordPress hosts limit the amount of websites on each of the servers. Now, they're not as transparent as getting your own and managing your own WordPress hosting, because you don't really know when you're working with a managed host what they're doing in the background with the servers and how many sites they're loading up on each one. However, they're very, very managed, meaning they take care of the resources that each site is using. And though they do limit the resources at your pricing level, they do take care of everything in the background for you. It's the highest cost per website, but it's also the most service, and oftentimes the best customer service and support as far as managed WordPress hosting. Now, managed hosting is a place where I would recommend if you're wanting to host multiple websites for clients or for your own business, but at the same time, you're wanting to have it done for you type of system where everything is taken care of. You don't really want to know the resources of each site and how whether the server needs to be upgraded at any point. That is all managed for you. And as far as cost, that's the highest cost. And we'll talk about exactly what those costs might be and where I might recommend you go as far as how many sites you're hosting, how much support you think you're going to be needing, and whether you would like that taken care of for you, or you're willing to put in a little bit of learning time to figure out how to manage this for yourself. Now, self-managed is something that oftentimes I will recommend over either one of these types of services, shared hosting or managed hosting. Now, where I talk about shared is like a done for you type of system, everything taken care of, least expensive, but not as powerful as far as expanding and growth. And you may encounter kind of when you buy a discounted price at the beginning, it kind of goes up, and it can be sort of like 3 times the price you paid originally once you get off the discount period with shared hosting. And you have the disadvantage of everything hosted on the same servers and not as separated. That's called the noisy neighbor problem, where if you have too many sites and services hosted on a box or on a server, you may end up with a slower website, or the problem where your neighbor who you don't even know might get a popular post or a popular growth on their website, which affects the resources and speed that your visitors are able to take advantage of. Managed hosting really takes care of that for you. But again, if you grow or if you exceed the resources in your plan, you might go up as far as cost. Now, self-managed hosting is kind of the best of both worlds. In both of these types of hosts, both managed and self-managed, the domain is separate, and it recommended that you register your domain name separate from the hosting company, whether it's managed or self-managed. And then the email, also recommended to host email. It's a best practice to host your email, regular email addresses that need hosting, send and receive email, separate from the website. Now the website is hosted at the managed or the self-managed host. The website, again, kept separate from the domain and from the email. And then the DNS, it's recommended that you control your DNS yourself and use a high-speed domain name system service so that when visitors want to go to the website, they go through the DNS at a very high speed, something that's called time to first byte, BYTE. Time to first byte is very fast with certain DNS services. If you're using shared hosting, which is hosting your domain for you, you're kind of beholden to their system, loaded up with other customers, and so your website is likely to be slower as far as performance and loading speed for your visitors. And so with self-managed hosting, you're actually buying the website server itself and choosing the power and cost of that website server yourself, independent of the self-managed hosting company. Now, a company that I recommend is called Gridpane. There are others out there that basically layer a software stack for managing the server, and they also offer customer support and support for your WordPress websites and your hosting system for you. And for that, they charge a monthly or yearly fee here, and then you get your website server yourself, and you can choose to have multiple servers, and you can put only your own clients on servers, or you can even put a single website on a single service. And that is more along the lines of cloud servers and cloud hosting, where as one website grows, you can be aware of that and you can grow with it. Also, keeping your DNS separate, your website separate, your email separate, and your domain name registration separate, so that there's not one point of failure as there is with shared hosting. If anything were to go down or anything were to fill up as far as resources with your hosting server, then you can address just that point, and everything else remains working because they're not all connected and reliant on the same piece of hardware, the server. And so self-managed hosting is generally a medium cost. I would recommend shared hosting for just starting out, managed hosting for just starting out as well. However, it has the highest cost, but you can just leave everything to the managed host. And then self-managed really has a range. If you're only going to be hosting one website or just a couple websites, self-managed hosting really isn't that cost effective. But when you get up to, almost 10 websites or 10 websites and higher, self-managed hosting is by far the lowest cost solution per website. And if you're going to be hosting client sites, self-managed is the one that I recommend. And so over here on the left side, you can see that there is a big range of cost as far as hosting websites. And then if you're talking about websites that need dynamic and logged in users, and by dynamic, I mean that the website pages can't be served statically. A lot of websites can be cached on the server, so that when WordPress delivers the page to the user, those static pages have already been created and saved on the server, and they can just be delivered instantly and with speed. However, with other types of more advanced websites, like with LMS systems or courses, learning management systems, or membership sites where you have the user needing to be logged in so that they can know whether they are able to access the private content in the membership, and especially e-commerce sites where there are users making a shopping cart in real time, logging in to enter payment information or to change their payment information. Those types of pages all should be served separately, and really they should be given a higher level of resources for the website. Now I'm putting an up arrow here to mark, higher level of resources. And so for each one of these, I would recommend either managed or self-managed for each of these 3 types of websites. And I'll show you around my hosting that I've used. I've used shared hosting in the past and migrated and upgraded to managed hosting, especially with Flywheel and with some other great companies like WP Engine, and Kinsta is another great managed WordPress host. And lately I've moved almost everything over to a self-managed system on GridPane. Next, we're going to get into the specific recommendations I make for WordPress hosting and talk about real costs as far as hosting either single websites or multiple websites. Let's get into it.